Good evening, ladies.
Hello, Mr. Ben.
Wow, it's been a while since I've taken this out for a spin. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. I'd like to thank my beautiful wife, Jessica, for running our sound for tonight while Ron is on the mend. I'd also like her to thank for making this shirt for me for the occasion. For those of you who didn't get a chance to read it, it says, "I always listen to my wife because I am the perfect husband." You don't have to laugh that loud, Nancy. It says, "I don't always listen to my wife, but when I do, things tend to work out better." As you'll hear by my testimony tonight, we can replace the word wife with God. Because if I listen to God, things work out better. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. Tonight's message is called "The Thunder Rolls," just like that awesome Garth Brooks song. And no, Jessica was not a part of the thunder. She was a part of my rainbow after the storm. That's from the Gospel according to Brownie Points. I was raised a small town Catholic boy in Gowanda, about an hour south of here. I belonged to a Christian Boy Scout group. I invited Jesus into my heart like we usually do when we're 7, 8 years old. And that's when I became a roadside assistance Christian. Now, roadside assistance Christian versus a GPS Christian. So I only called on God when I couldn't get out of whatever problem that I got myself into. Versus the GPS Christians that always rely on God for every step they make, every move that they take. And it would be a long time before I would get there. I graduated UB Architecture. I married my college sweetheart. Started my own construction company. Bought our first house. Had our first child. At the time, it was everything I thought I had ever wanted. As many of you know, having a baby, parenting, tends to magnify any underlying problems that are in the marriage already. And that's exactly what happened. We were in and out of counseling. I had to close my business. I had to let go 5 or 6 employees, tell their families. I came home one night and I found my house up for sale. So that's when I knew the marriage wasn't going to get any better. That was followed by the divorce papers, and that's like a shocking reality to read those divorce papers. And what really was the twisting of the knife in the back on those divorce papers was the reason for divorce was cruel and inhumane treatment. And I was just flabbergasted by this, and I didn't know if it was a confession and an admission, and it was actually a premonition of what was yet to come. At that point, I didn't go into marriage expecting it to fail, and I didn't really know anybody around me that had gone through divorce. I just thought you were married forever. My parents were married 30 plus years, grandparents 50 plus years. That's just how it was done. So I felt completely abandoned, alone, afraid, devastated, overwhelmed, helpless, hopeless, hurt. I was angry with her, and I was angry with myself for believing in what I thought was the fairy tale. My entire life was crumbling around me, and I knew I had to get to church, but I didn't know exactly why. So that's what I did. A colleague invited me to the chapel at Elmwood, which at the time met in the Regal Theater. And no offense to our church, but this was the best church ever. You cannot beat a church with stadium seating and cup holders at every seat. It was awesome. So that's what I was doing. And because I was in a hurt and broken spot, I didn't want to talk to anybody or deal with anybody. So I would just duck in and duck out, avoid the crowds, avoid talking to anybody as much as humanly possible. Just getting in, listen to a couple good worship songs, message, and leave. And that was it. That was how I was dealing with it. As the divorce proceedings continued, those of you who have not gone through a divorce, it's essentially a couple attorneys getting together, sitting down with what they call a referee, and it is a referee. They figure out all of the nuisance of the divorce and the paperwork, and when everything is done, then you sit in front of the judge signs off on it, on to the next one. So that was our process. So I have my attorney calling me to tell me that, your ex-wife wants the dining room table, but you can have the kitchen table. So in the emotion that I was already dealing with, I couldn't handle phone calls like this, and I couldn't afford an attorney at $250 an hour talking about a $100 table that I got at Kmart. So I just said, please do not ever call me for something like this. She can have everything. I'll take whatever is left. I can't sort through this. And those of you who haven't gone through a divorce, it is like having your entire life put on an auction block. Going once, going twice, sold to the loneliest bidder. When your attorney went on vacation, however, you got a vacation because were guaranteed for 1 week or 2 weeks that maybe that's some semblance of what your new normal was going to look like. You didn't have to worry about anything. My attorney, though, called me from his hotel in Jamaica saying he needed to talk to me. I didn't know what. I paid my bills, like what was going on. He told me that my ex-wife had filed paperwork saying that my son is not my son, which, with the emotion I was already dealing with, that didn't even register to me. I didn't even know how to comprehend that, let alone he looked just like me, so what was her angle? What was her game? There's no possible way that could be true. So naturally, with this being brought to court, you've got to go through the DNA testing, the whole 9 yards. And then it's a waiting game, which is as bad as hearing that news initially, because every time I get Matthew, I wonder, is he going to be taken away? Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle it? What do I do in the meantime? How do I love a child that's not mine? How do I love a child that I have no idea how long I have with him? And that's when I felt this overwhelming peace and presence. When I hear from God, it's not like James Earl Jones speaking into my ear, talking to me. This was more of a feeling. And the feeling was, he's not your child, he's my child, and you're going to love him with everything you have for as long as you have. So that's the road that we were on. But it was still tough. Every time when he was in his crib crying, I had a hard time picking him up because I was afraid to get close to him and hurt more. So he's crying, I'm crying, and that was our routine for 2 months until we got the DNA test back. Back in my church, showing up on Sundays definitely was not enough. I needed a lot more than that. So I got involved in everything that I could think of just to surround myself with good people and keep my mind off of what was happening. The results did come back. 3 pages that said there was a 0.00% chance that I was Matthew's father. That hurt when I got it, and it hurt for the days after reading it. Because I would read it, and it was clear as day that the paperwork said he wasn't my child. So then I would cry, curl up in a ball, take a day off of work. And then I was thinking, well, maybe I missed something. Maybe there's something else that it says. Maybe there's some other chance. So I read through the paperwork again, further downward spiral, just again and again and again. And this happened for an entire week. And I remember getting dressed for work, putting my boots on, having my lunchbox, being right by the door. Tears would come. I'd call my boss and say, you know what, I can't do it today. In court, the judge was pretty upset, naturally. And you know it's bad when the judge apologizes to the man in divorce court. But that's what she said. She said, Mr. Jones, I'm sorry. None of this was by your choice, but the next one will be yours. She was like, I don't care what the DNA test says. I want to give you the opportunity to make the decision whether you're going to accept this child fully or turn around and walk away. She was like, if you turn around and walk away, that's is entirely honorable and understandable. If you're going to accept this child, you're going to pay child support and everything else. And how could I not accept this child? So, of course, I agreed to be Matthew's father. At that point, we were in a situation that had never been done in the history of Erie County Court, and that's how to proceed from there, because by rights, I had to now adopt Matthew, but you can't have an adoption within so close of a time frame as to a divorce. The judge for the Supreme Court didn't know how to go further with it, so she said, I'll have to confer with the family court judge, and we'll get back to you. It was decided that the divorce proceedings would have to stop. We would then be rushed to family court to do an expedited adoption, go through the adoption process, then come back to the divorce court to finish the divorce, and that would be it. So going through the expedited adoption, I had to have a social worker come into my home and examine my home to see if I was a capable father, even though I'd been a father. I mean, Matthew was 6, maybe 9 months old at the time. I'd been the father right along, he'd been living right along, but now I have this person inspecting whether I could or could not have him in my home. When we were in court the day for the adoption, I'll never forget seeing all the happy people and their Sunday best and just all these excited faces in tears. And here I am, my life has been shredded. And the judge asked, do you want a picture? And I'm like, no, why on earth would I want a picture of this? This is awful. So that was that. I had a mountain of debt. I couldn't afford my truck payments. My truck got repossessed. So at this point, I lost my wife, house, job, truck, and somewhat my son. And I was doing the most mundane and meaningless jobs working for another construction company. I felt like a shadow of the man that I used to be, just a hollow robot, just going through the motions. One of these jobs that I was working on was this huge mansion downtown on Lincoln Parkway. Now, I couldn't even afford to get to the job, and I'm working for these people who have an insane amount of money. So they have, I don't know how big the house was, but it was big enough at one time to be a Catholic school. So they had to have the entire exterior of this house restored. There was only 2 companies in the country that could do it. They brought in this company from Minnesota. They didn't want to pay for room and board, so they bought the $500,000 house behind them to put them up for the 2 years that it would take to restore the outside. This is the kind of jobs that I was working on. So what am I doing? Am I managing like this multi-million-dollar thing? No. So on the roof, there was a window sticking out of the roof. The window sill was rotten. The only way that anybody could possibly see it is the roofers had to come in and take every tile off the roof, organize them, put a new roofing underlayment, and then put them all back. So it was one of the roofers that noticed a rotten windowsill, so on the 4th floor, essentially, of this house. So that's what I was brought in to do. We didn't have ladders tall enough to reach the outside of this house. And this house is so big, ladies, that I could walk in the gutter all the way around the perimeter of the house. The gutter wasn't like the little nail-in gutters like we have on our houses. This was a huge trough that was built right into the side of the roof. It was about this wide that I could walk in very comfortably all the way around the edge of this house. So that's what I did. I went into the attic, climbed out the window, and worked on the 2 windows that I had to work on. The homeowners didn't know that I was there. None of the construction people that were around knew that I was there. It was just me doing this completely ridiculous job. So that's what I was doing for a couple of days. One particular day, it was very gusty, windy, which is the worst kind of environment. It's better to have a windy day at a constant rate because you can prepare for it. You'd be working along and all of a sudden you just get knocked to the side or the other. Now I was working in the day where we didn't have the harnesses and the straps and everything like they do and require now. It's just me on a roof with a tool belt. So that's what was happening. Occasionally a gust of wind would knock me here and knock me there. In one instance, it was very close. So it knocked me back far enough that I was just on one leg. And I took a breather for a minute, and then I turned around and looked over the edge. And I was wondering, would I die if I fell from that height? Chances are, it's 50-50. Maybe I would just get severely injured. If I wanted to die, I would have to go head first. So then I got to look a little bit more. Well, I'd have to go head first and make sure I hit the driveway and not any of the shrubbery around it. That's when the lies started to ring in, where I would hear, well, nobody's going to miss you when you're gone. Now, I was a decent guy. I mean, I knew that wasn't the case. Nothing you do matters. Well, maybe not. I mean, I'm standing in a gutter doing a windowsill job that nobody cares about. The last 10 years, 1/3 of your life didn't matter. That one hit close to home. Your life doesn't matter. You know what? He was right. Took off my tool belt and went right to the edge of the roof. And there it was, standing, leaning over. And I was at a point that I could see, you have the driveway right against these city houses, and I could see the shrubbery between the driveway and the house. And I was done. I was ready to go. And I was at the point stretching so far that, like when you're doing your exercises, like I do exercises, but when you stretch your leg out and you start to feel it twitch, that's the point that I was at. So I could feel it twitch. So then I stopped and leaned forward. I did it again, and I felt it twitch. So I reached for my leg, and I realized I had my phone in the pocket of my cargo pants. I pulled out my phone, and it was a text message that said, "I love you, my friend." I stepped back, crawled in the window, laid on the floor, and cried. I don't know if I was there 5 minutes or 5 hours. I have no idea. But it was for me in that moment that God was real to me. I did matter, at least to one person who randomly sent that text message. The random person was one of the greeters from my church. At that point, a voice came to me. It took me forever to find it. But I could recite the verse. I could rarely ever recite Bible verses, but this is one I'd heard some point in the 6 months that I was going to church. And it was, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for man. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as your reward, it is the Lord Jesus Christ that you serve. So for me, yeah, I could buy that. So I'm not doing this windowsill for a construction company or my boss. I'm doing it for God. He's the only one that can see it. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to do everything, was live by that verse. Ladies, I'd love to tell you that I made a lot of fame and fortune in construction, and that led me on the path. And I did useless job after useless job after useless job. Eventually, I did get to where I was running multi-million-dollar residential jobs. So now that I was blessed at work, a couple years went by, I was going to get married again. This time I was going to do it right, and I married a good Christian girl, and in fact, she was a pastor's daughter. 2 points for Vince. But more importantly, I was not going to make the same mistakes that I made in my first marriage. I made completely new ones. 4 years later, I woke up to another divorce ending, and I didn't know why. I was sad for Matthew for losing an entire family, and I was sad because I now had the stigma of having a second divorce. Reality really hit me when I was watching either Oprah or Ellen. Yeah, that's okay, you can laugh, the men did. I was at a point so low, I was getting hope from daytime TV. Marie Osmond was talking about all of her divorces. And I don't know what her current tally is. But she said something that really struck me. You marry at the level of your self-esteem. Was I in the place that I needed to be to attract the person that I wanted to be with? No, I wasn't. See, I thought I wanted the polar opposite of my first wife. I got exactly that 100%. That's not what I needed. I also didn't need the financial ruin that I was in. And I knew I had to get my life in order. I was working 7 days a week, and I only stopped long enough to go to church. And at the time, it was here. I had creditors calling me. People were seizing my bank accounts, putting liens on everything that I'd owned. I was drowning in a debt. Identity theft, to me, was an upgrade. I met with a Christian mentor who had two words for me, Sabbath and tithe. I said, I can't afford to do that. And he said, you can't afford not to. So that's what I did. See, at the time, I thought tithing was the pastor preaching for a paycheck. So I would give $1, maybe $2. If the message was really, really good, Abraham Lincoln would come out to pay. And you know, Pastor Sam says otherwise, but I think he was on to me because right around this time, he started doing the dollar offering. So now I had to give $2 every week. But I remember a message that Pastor Sam gave on tithing. And I only remember one thing he said. He said, even if you don't trust me, I need you to believe this. So give your money to the church down the street. Now, naturally, I didn't, but I certainly didn't give my money as cheerfully as Sister Phyllis asked us to. Every week, when I would turn over that tithe, I'd be like, okay, God, here's my grocery money for the week. Okay, God, here's my gas money for the month. Over time, that became a form of worship for me, because as I turned in that tithe envelope, that was me thanking God for being able to tithe, being able to have the money, have the job, to be able to give that back. I was still in a mountain of debt, so much that bankruptcy couldn't make a dent in it. Now, when I say that, I had owed over $100,000 to the federal government in back taxes. I had owed about 10 grand to the state and numerous other vendors. Even in bankruptcy, state debt and federal debt does not go away. For the rest of my life, I would be paying on that money. There was no chance that I was going to get rid of it. I talked to an accountant, and she said it was a long shot, but I could file what's called an offer in compromise, and then the government will get back to you with whatever they say you owe, and you got to pay it. I had to pay $100 to fill out the paperwork, and it was the equivalent of a financial colonoscopy. I mean, the paperwork took me forever to fill out. So that's what I did. I filled it out, sent it in. In the meantime, I had another vendor that I had owed $8,000 to. Now, the real challenge with this is a mom and pop vendor that I still dealt with every day working for another construction company. So every day I'd see them, I'd look at him, I'd be like, I know I owe you $8,000, but I need this for another job. And that was very difficult, both for me and for that person. I tried paying him off a couple of different times, and I do like $25 here, $50 there. It really doesn't make a dent in $8,000. So I talked to him, I said, I want to make this right, I just don't know how. It's obvious I can't afford to pay you, but I'll even work it off if I have to. I have Saturdays, like whatever. He's like, okay, that's fine. So I worked for him for 3 half-day Saturdays doing some work that he needed around his shop. At the end of it, he said, okay, how much do you want to get paid for the work you did? And I'm like, I'm indebted to you for $8,000. I can't determine what my wage is, my worth is. So what if you tell me I'm getting paid $2 an hour, then that's what it is. So I said, okay, you're all set. So I got in my truck and I drove away, and then I had to drive back because I was like, what do you mean I'm all set? What do I owe? What do you mean? You're going to start all over with a clean slate. And I said to him, I said, but how? I don't deserve it. I essentially stole from you, and you're just giving that to me. You wanted to make it right, and you did what you said you were going to do. For me, that was the first time in my life that I experienced what true forgiveness. That was a tangible example of what true forgiveness looked like. And to this day, I still deal with him on a regular basis. I received the acceptance letter from the IRS that they had agreed to an offer in compromise. There was a stipulation that I had to make 5 payments, and they had to be on time. And for the next 5 years, I had to file taxes, and they had to be paid on time. If not, that entire $100,000 debt plus interest would be then compounded again. So it was a very nerve-wracking 5-year period. The 5 payments that the federal government asked from me were $49 each. Yes. They wanted 5 payments over 5 months of $49. So my accountant said she had never seen that in her 30 years working for the federal government. And you hear the advertisements on TV of the different attorneys or accountants saying that they can settle your debt for 50 cents on the dollar. Or maybe they'll settle your debt for 30%. Maybe even 25% of what you owe they'll settle for. Have you heard a commercial on TV that says we will settle your debt for 25 ten-thousandths of 1%? Do you want to know what I prayed for? See, I knew that debt was too big for God to take away. It was the federal government. God, you can't touch the federal government. Obviously, look at our leaders. I prayed that God would show me a way that I could pay it off. The debt wasn't too big for God. My comprehension of God was too small in my life. Now that God can do this, he can do anything. So it is time to find me a wife. How on earth was I going to do that having failed twice before? I said that for the most part I didn't make the same mistake in my second marriage. The one mistake that was resoundingly true for both is that I wasn't ready. I didn't know what I wanted or what I needed. So what did I want? What did God want for me? A friend of mine told me that they prayed for specific things in a spouse, right down to tattoos and hair color. I'm like, God doesn't work that way, does he? Then I discovered Genesis 24. And that is probably one of my all-time favorite couple stories in the Bible, having to do with Isaac and Rebekah. So those of you who don't know it, Isaac's father, Abraham, said to Isaac's senior servant, go find me a wife for my son. So I'm having a hard enough time finding a spouse on my own. I can't imagine my boss coming to me saying, find a spouse for my child. I cannot even imagine the pressure that servant was under. But it was so incredible because that servant prayed, and he said, Lord, when I get to this land, when I ask a woman for water, if she's the one that then offers to water my camels, then I will know it's the right one. That was so incredibly specific. Naturally, it came true. That's what I wanted. I wanted the Genesis 24 love. I wanted a woman that would give up everything for me and have a servant's heart, among other things. What were the other things? I made a list. We'll go through that list right now. Look at Jessica turned red. No, I wouldn't bore you with the list. How was I going to find this person that I was going to marry? I had heard once, probably in one of Pastor Sam's messages, you hang out with who you want to be with. If you want to be wealthy, you hang out with wealthy people. If you want to be happy, you hang out with happy people. I didn't want to be single, so I hung around with married people from this church that were my godly example of what to look for in a wife. So that's what I did. And can I tell you how many couples invited me over for regular weekly Sunday dinners, holiday dinners, Easter dinners, family vacations, family camping trips? One year I was invited to 4 Thanksgiving dinners. And you better believe I went to them all. Obviously. Observing you with your families is what put me on the road to the happiness that I have today. So I began to write things down on the list. And I prayed on that list. One friend even told me that I was never going to find a wife at Bethesda because Bethesda is too old of a church. Yeah. Well, and I said, these old ladies have daughters and granddaughters, right? As I was making my list, I said that God is going to deliver her right to my door. I am not leaving this church because then it's me. When God brings her here, then I know it's God. And Jessica did, in fact, grow up in this church. So when she came to my door, we'd actually known each other for 10 years before we had reconnected, which was an incredible thing. I met her before I had even met my second wife, and she is quick to remind me of that at times. And if she had gotten her flirt on 10 years before, we might be married for 15 years. Now, ladies, let me ask you a question. We're going to settle this. That's a 5-year marital dispute that we have. 10 years before, she invited me over to a housewarming party. Is that flirting? Yes or no? Yes. She says to me, and my other female friend will be there. Is that flirting or is that a setup? Thank you.
No, that's just in case things go sour. Use her friend as an excuse to bail.
You would have to add that. So, and we talked for 36, maybe 46 hours straight, just nonstop texting, day, night, everything. I was exhausted, but in just a matter of days, I knew that this was it. So she brought dinner, which another win, and we ended up falling asleep on the couch. So I remember waking up and hearing her say, "I love you." I'm like, did I really hear her say that? Of course, I got to be smooth, so what do I say in return? So she's laying there sleeping, so I'm like, did I dream that? Did she say that? What's going on? So being as suave as I am, this is my response. What did you just say? Yeah. That was my response to the first time my wife told me she loved me. So she then pretended to be asleep. And the rest was history. Jessica was a package deal because she had 9-year-old Ella and I had 9-year-old Matthew, who ended up being just a week apart. I wanted to adopt Ella, and Ella, seeing her mom change her name after we got married, Ella just did the same on everything. So I sat down and asked her, I would like to be your dad. Would you like that? in her little 9-year-old voice, as a matter of fact, she said, well, I thought you already were. So we went through the adoption process with Ella. And for the last 10 years, I had been fearing how I was going to talk to Matthew about his story and what was it going to be like and what was I going to say and how was it going to be done. And witnessing the process of me adopting Ella encouraged Matthew to ask questions, and we had the discussions. He got to see his adoption paperwork in the same courtroom in front of the same judge that I adopted Ella 10 years later. This time, when the judge asked me if I wanted a picture, I gladly said yes. Without looking for brownie points, my wife is probably the greatest testament of my faith. But there's still something missing. That list that I talked about had 65 things on it, if you can believe it. Nancy, yes, you're laughing. 65 things. And of that, 64 of them were evident in the first 2 days that we reconnected. But we're still waiting and struggling with one. We've been trying for the last 5 years to have a baby, and it's not happening. See, all I ever wanted to be was a husband and father. A job, to me, like what I did, didn't really matter. I never really realized how much that I wanted to have a baby until after my second divorce, about 6 months after, at a women's retreat, no less, when I was helping out downstairs. If you guys remember Joanna Bates, she had her baby girl Cora at the time, maybe 1 or 2 months old, and we were eating lasagna and salad. So that's tough to do with an infant in your arms. So I just offered to hold Cora while she ate. I had to walk up and down the hall because tears were pouring out of my eyes, carrying this little baby that I realized this was probably never going to happen for me. It happened again after family bowling that we had over on Kenmore Avenue. I was carrying Abby out to the truck. I was one of the few men that Abby would allow to hold her, being a few months old at the time. And I remember somebody walking by and saying, "Oh my gosh, you have such a beautiful daughter." And I don't think Tara saw at the time, but my eyes started to well up again because this is what it's like. It happened again just last year. A friend of mine had this absolutely beautiful peanut of a little girl, and I was remodeling their bathroom. And I realized that my meetings with them couldn't be any longer than 15 minutes or I'd start to cry. So I'd be in there measuring up their bathroom, like whatever, okay, I gotta go. Come back like a week, month later, pick out some things with them. Okay, I gotta go, and I would go in my truck, and that's when I would start to cry. See, I truly believe that God is the author and finisher of life. And that children are this absolute precious gift from God. They really are a miracle, even at the teenage years. But after 14 procedures, 1 surgery, hundreds of hormone shots and doctor visits, I would ask myself, why would God give us the overwhelming desire to have a baby and not give us one? Why does God give children to people who don't even want them? Why doesn't God want us to have a baby? How much heartache can I endure? What did I do wrong? What do I say to my wife if she asks me the same questions? Even with all that God has done in my life, there are times where I still struggle with hope and faith. Hearing messages like we heard yesterday certainly help. But it also reminds me of the story of the disciples in the boat when Peter walks on water. It's found in Matthew 14, 22 to 32. So after Jesus feeds the 5,000, he asks the disciples to get on a boat and cross the lake. Now this is the middle of the night. It's pitch black. The wind comes, the waves come, start crashing. The disciples are scared. Peter's in the boat. They see a figure coming through the water. Now, we're reading the story, so we know it's Jesus, but they don't know that it's Jesus. They think it's a ghost. So they're all afraid. This is where Peter gets out of the boat, goes to Jesus, sinks. You're shaking your heads. You're familiar with the story. What I need reminding of out of this story that I wanted to share with you is the following. Peter was the only one to get out of the boat, and he challenges Jesus to prove himself. Peter was successful over the impossible at first. Then he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and that's when he starts to sink. So, how often do I take my eyes off of Jesus in the hard times? When do I look in Jesus' general direction, but not really at Jesus? See, that's what the disciples did in the boat. They were looking at the dark figure approaching them, but they didn't know it was Jesus. So oftentimes I will sit here on Sunday, look in the direction of God, but sometimes I'm not honing in and focusing right on what his son did. Peter cried out, and Jesus immediately saved him. In our weakest times, we have the power to call out to Jesus. And the thing that I miss is Jesus not only has the power to deliver us from the storm, he has the power to completely dismantle the storm that we're in. And that's what we saw in that example. The thing that I really wanted to focus on tonight was that storm wasn't just for Peter. That storm was for all the disciples. They were all in the boat. They were all scared. None of them recognized Christ. And for me, I saw that in my own life. During my first storm, I didn't even know I had a boat, let alone that there was one person in there that was going to reach out and pull me to safety. During my second storm, this entire church was my boat. It was more like an ark, really. But more specifically than that, is during that second storm that I was in, I called on about 6 guys. I told them that I was struggling. I didn't even tell them why. None of them asked. Just, what can we do? And months and months and months, they spent praying for me, encouraging me day and night to help me through that storm. The fact of the matter is, we are all headed into or out of a storm. And just as much as your crew members want to help you get through the storm, they also want to help you rejoice at the end. And that's, for me, that's why I'm here tonight, is to rejoice with you for everything that God has done in my life. Many thanks to you guys. And I love the verse used at the end of this passage, Matthew 14:33, when all the disciples worshiped him, and they exclaimed together, "You really are the Son of God." That storm wasn't just the revelation to Peter, it was for everyone in the boat. Ladies, I want to thank you for listening to me tonight, but most important, I want to thank you for living. I want to thank you for inspiring me by being the living examples of God's love and promises in my life. Thank you.